I can confirm we've gone live.
Thank you very much. Well, good evening, and I'd like to welcome everyone to this remote meeting, which is an advisory meeting of the Planning Committee. Please note that the meeting is being broadcast and recorded. Due to the changes in the remote meeting protocol, and as agreed at Bracknell Forest Annual Council on the 28th of April 2021, this is an advisory meeting of the Planning Committee, and the formal decisions will be agreed by delegation as agreed by Council. If any applications go against the recommendations set out in the agenda, then a reduced committee will be required to meet. This is all to do with the new COVID laws as applied by the government. Members, please note that normal rules of debate apply, including the requirement for you to be present during the duration of the whole debate. So if you are absent for any part of the debate, then you should abstain from voting. Now, we are expecting a speaker to talk to item 7 on the agenda, and I'd like to extend a welcome to you, Claire. If you just like to put your camera off at the moment, and then I'll explain to you what will happen when we come to the point on the agenda when you need to speak. Now to the first item on the agenda, are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. I have received apologies from Councillors Bandari, Mrs Mackenzie Boyle and Skinner.
Okay, I think we also need to record apologies for Councillor Birch, Dale Birch, unless he's on the meeting. Oh, he's here. Sorry, Dale.
I believe he's joined, yes.
Earlier. Yeah, okay, fine. Are members bringing any other apologies? In that case, members of the committee, please turn on your microphone and confirm you're present only when Hannah calls your name. Please don't turn on your cameras on. Anyone who doesn't respond will be recorded as giving their apologies. Hannah.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Angel.
Present.
Councillor Dr Barnard.
Present.
Councillor Birch.
Present.
Councillor Brossard.
Present.
Councillor Brown.
Present.
Councillor Dudley.
Present.
Councillor Badibo.
Present.
Councillor Green.
Present.
Councillor Mrs Hayes.
Present.
Councillor Hayden.
Present.
Councillor Mrs Mattick.
Present.
Councillor Mrs Mackenzie.
Present.
Councillor Mossam.
Present.
Councillor Parker.
Present.
And Councillor Virgo.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other members in attendance, please turn on your microphone, confirm that you're present when Hannah calls your name. If your name is not called, then please advise me that you're present via the meetings chat, and I'll ask you to confirm.
I think I can only see Councillor Atkinson.
Present.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you very much. Agenda item 2 is to confirm as a correct record the minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 22nd of April and the annual meeting on the 28th of April. Before I ask Councillor Brossard to second the motion, please indicate in the meetings chat if you have any issue of the accuracy. Can't see anything. So Councillor Brossard, are you happy to second the motion?
I am, Chairman. Seconded. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. As nobody has indicated they have an issue, therefore I take it that is agreed. Agenda item 3 is for declarations of interest, and the full text of this is set out in the agenda. If any member has a disclosure with peculiar interest or an affected interest to declare, please indicate and I'll come to you in turn. Okay, I haven't seen any, so we move on. The 4th item on the agenda is consideration of any urgent items of business.
No, none notified, Chair.
Okay. For everybody's information, there are 2 items on the agenda that have been deferred for different reasons. The first one is agenda item 5, which is application 20-01063 Crown Land east of Swindley Road, and agenda item 6, which is the land of rear of Eggleton and Popular Cottages. Both of those have been deferred to a later meeting. So we move straight to agenda item 7, which is on page 65 of your agenda papers, which is Collingwood, Mushroom Castle, Winkfield. And I'll hand over to Basha, I believe. Is it Basha?
No, Chair, it's me. My name's Sarah.
Sarah. I saw that Basha was on leave, so I thought. Okay.
No,
over
she's
to you,
present in the
Sarah.
meeting. She's just, yeah.
Is she? Oh, she's working on a leave, bless her.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Right, let me just get myself sorted. Okay, hopefully everybody can see the title screen. Should be sharing my screen now.
Can't see anything.
No, I can't see anything yet, Sarah.
Can't see
Can't see
anything.
anything. Failing at the first hurdle.
Well, it happens. That's it, I think. Yeah, we can see it now.
That's better. Sorry, it's the first time I'm doing this over Zoom, so it's finding out where all the buttons are.
Okay.
So this is an application to agree details reserved by conditions attached to approve application 18/00639/FUL. This full planning permission was determined by the Planning Committee in August 2019 and allowed the construction of 5 dwellings following the demolition of the existing bungalow and outbuildings. This application also accepted the principle of formally widening Mushroom Castle to provide one passing place located opposite Rosemary Cottage and for a distance of 50 metres from the junction with Chavey Down Road. The proposal would also include works to this junction. So the application before you tonight, the conditions application, seeks to approve the details connected with conditions 3, which relates to external materials, condition 4, which relates to windows to be obscurely glazed and non-opening, 5, the means of access, 8, site organisation, and 15, renewable energy. If I can draw your attention to the supplementary on the yellow sheet, an informative has been added requesting that the applicant informs residents of when works are to be undertaken on Mushroom Castle. So this is a plan of the widening works to Mushroom Castle that were secured and form part of condition 5. So you can see the area of the works to the junction with Chavey Down Road, and then the small strip that requires to be widened along Mushroom Castle for a length of 50 metres. Then it goes back to the original length, and again, a small section of widening opposite Rosemary Cottage to enable a passing bay to be formed. So here we have the plan in connection with condition 8, which was for the site organisation, which shows a vehicle, a delivery vehicle being able to turn within the site so it can enter the site and exit in a forward gear after making its delivery. And there's space for site office and storage of materials with a wheel wash facility at the entrance. Here we have samples of materials, sheets showing what materials will be proposed to be used, mock-up of the dwelling, and onto the photos. So condition 3 showed that it was to be constructed, it's proposed to construct the buildings out of an Ibstock Ashdown futon multi-stock hand stock brick with plinth, sills and soldier cores picked out in a Weinberger Cassia multi-brick, so that's the ready brick. The roof and vertical tile hangings to be dormers would be in a HF weathered clay tile in a red-brown colour. As Mushroom Castle contains a variety of materials, including a red stock and red bricks, the materials are considered acceptable. Condition 4 did not actually require any details to be submitted, merely that the windows in the east elevation of plot 1 should be glazed with a minimum of Pilkington level 3 obscure glass. Condition 5 relating to the means of access. This condition required the widening works to be undertaken on details of the widening works to be submitted. So the details shown on this drawing show that Mushroom Castle will be formally widened to a width of 4.8 metres for a distance of 50 metres and opposite Rosemary Cottage as shown on this drawing. And these details reflect what has been agreed in the 278 agreement, which Highways have approved. And as such, the Highway Authority has no objection to agreeing these details. In respect of condition 8, as we've seen, the applicant submitted this plan. Request from the highway officer, further information on the swept paths was provided, showing access and departure in a forward gear. It is considered that sufficient space is shown within the site for parking of personnel, storage of materials, loading and unloading of plant materials, wheel cleaning and staff welfare facilities. It is therefore considered that the submitted to and approved in writing requirement of condition 8 of application 18639 full can be discharged. Moving on to condition 15, the energy demand condition. The revised energy demand statement dated the 16th of April 2021 demonstrates that the proposal would achieve 33% of the energy requirements from on-site renewables, which is in excess of the policy requirement, and therefore that detail is acceptable. So if we just move on to the presentation, here are some views of Mushroom Castle. Members may or may not be aware that works were started before the conditions has been formally discharged. Hence they were asked to stop, and hence you can see the orange fencing where they have started works but have stopped through the course. So this is the access onto Chavey Down Road. And you can see that there is space before the hedge. You know, it's a small section of this place which has already been kind of ran over numerous times to compact the earth and remove the grass. And it's really just formalisation of that to enable 2 vehicles to pass safely. Again, these photos are just progressing up Mushroom Castle, and you can see Collingwood is this site behind the gates at the very end. And you can see that there is already a mixture of materials within Mushroom Castle itself. And that was the site that was approved. So accordingly, it is found that submitted details are acceptable, and it is recommended that the details submitted in respect of conditions 3, 5, 8 and 15 detailed upon page 71 and 72 of the agenda can be agreed. And that is the recommendation that is before you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Members, I explained to you earlier that this application complies with our public speaking regulations, and therefore, if I could ask Claire Jenkins, if you could please put on your camera. Can you take down the photograph now, please, Sarah? Otherwise, we only get a partial view of the members.
Yeah. Okay.
Basically, stop sharing at this point.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
There we go.
Lovely, thank you. As I can see the chat box then. Okay, Claire, do you mind if I call you Claire?
No, that's fine.
Thank you. We can just about hear you. I wonder if you could just move your microphone slightly up and try it. Let's try. Yeah, it's very, very faint actually. Is your earphones plugged in properly?
I'm just having me now?
No.
Yeah, not really. No.
That's really strange.
No.
Is there a volume setting?
Yeah, is there a volume setting? It was fine before when we spoke before.
How about this? Is that better? No.
Is there a volume setting on your? Are you on a PC or something?
On a PC, yeah.
Can you have a look at the volume settings and
I
see
am
if
trying to look at the volume settings.
okay. Or try unplugging and plugging them in again or something like that. It was great before.
Can you hear me now? No, I can't hear you.
Oh well, that's because I wasn't speaking.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Just a little better. Members, can you hear Claire?
Yes. Yes.
Better.
Yeah.
I can.
Just about.
Just about,
Okay.
very slight.
All
Can I
right. So if
shout?
members, if you turn your volume settings up on your earphones or whatever you're on, that it may help. Okay. So just to explain to you, Claire, that you will get 3 minutes uninterrupted to make your submission to the committee. We're quite strict on that 3 minutes, and I will go on mute. And as I say, you will be uninterrupted. I will come on again at around about 2 minutes and 40 seconds, and you will hear me say 20 seconds. You can ignore that, but it's just to let you know that you only have 20 seconds left. When we get to 3 minutes, I will ask you to stop speaking. At that point, I will ask members if they have any questions of clarification or accuracy from what you've said. Is that all clear?
Yes, that's fine. Can you hear me now?
It's no better, but we can just about hear you. So we'll see how we go on. If it may well be that members might have a question for you afterwards if they miss something.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So in the immortal words of TV, your 3 minutes start now.
Hello. I'm here tonight representing the residents group of Mushroom Castle. We are raising several points in regards to proposed changes to Mushroom Castle Lane. We object to the building works having started without proper consultation and being lied to by rude contractors who said they were from the council when they began the work without permissions in place. We believe the dishonesty shown will not improve. After works were halted, apart from an ad hoc chat with the contractor, residents have not been contacted for dialogue. The lane is unadopted and the responsibility of its upkeep is that of the residents fronting onto it. New traffic from construction and subsequent residences will impact the wear and tear to the lane, thus increasing the financial obligation of those residents, not by those in the new homes or by the contractor himself. He maintains that he would be responsible for the first 2 meters of the lane as directed by the Highways Agency. He suggested residents take out liability insurance for problems. This previously has been totally unnecessary, and residents are concerned that they will be left with a large bill to ensure the lane remains roadworthy. The proposals are for passing lanes, but having looked at what the contractor plans, the lane is to be widened from the entrance to 3/4 of the way down the lane, past Rosemary Cottage. This is not passing lanes. We believe the priority for this extension of the lane is for construction vehicles. The lane has served residents for many years without the need for it to be widened. The widening of the lane will allow for parking access to the park out of hours when the car park is closed. It will increase speed on the lane itself. There are currently 4 residences that have limited vision onto the lane, and increased speed will impact on its safety. In addition, there is no lighting or pavement for pedestrians to access, and pollution will increase, affecting children using the park. There is substantial damage to the hedgerow already from other building work that has been carried out along our lane, and work planned will have irreversible effects to the aesthetic of our small lane and the hedgerow itself. This is something we, the residents, are devastated by. Previously, the Locks Ride development was refused in part because of the change to the aesthetic of the area. The hedgerow has been standing in Winkfield Row
20 seconds.
untouched for many years. It is integral to the aesthetic of Mushroom Castle and Carnation Park on the other side. It is now to be decimated, all for the access of construction. We implore that you would take our feelings into this matter into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That's just as near to 3 minutes as you want. Well done.
Fingers crossed, yes.
Members, do you have any questions of clarification for Claire? Councillor Hayden. You're on mute, Peter. Councillor Hayden, if you're asking a question, you're on mute.
Sorry, Chair, I was having problems getting my mute button.
Right, you have a question for Ms.
Yes, please.
Jenkins.
I hope it's a valid question. Who owns the right of way and who actually owns the road?
That we're unsure of. When I bought my property, I was told my responsibility was for the part of the lane directly outside of my house, as are the other residents along the road. So therefore, as it's an unadopted road, we are assuming responsibility for it.
Thank you.
All right. Any other member have any questions for Ms. Jenkins? No. Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Jenkins. Of course, you want to stay and listen to the rest of the debate, but if I could ask you to mute and turn off your camera, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, members, do you have any questions, please, for the officers? Councillor Virgo.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Virgo speaking. Sarah, can I ask, or pass to transport, to follow Peter's point? Obviously, the residents are having enormous difficulty with what's happened in the past over the freedom of driving down the lane, which was blocked and they weren't told. Can you just explain to us where we stand with this as a council, i.e., can we enforce it? Can we stop it? Can we ask them to do things? I know we've got an informative, but what powers do we have, please, to help the residents in their problems?
So it is a private road adopted by the council, so the Highways Authority, and I'm sure James will come in and correct me if I'm wrong, but don't have any jurisdiction over it. We as a council, if there is a breach of planning, like any private site, have our planning enforcement powers to fall back on, but that's only if there is a breach of planning permission or planning control.
So can I ask as a supplementary, Sarah, your words, if in fact the problem over the access and general construction vehicles becomes chaotic, how would the residents get some remission out of that? What would they do, please?
How do you mean if it becomes chaotic? If
the lane is blocked for some considerable time, and there's no coordination between the developers and the residents, what's their course of action? Would they ring Bracknell, or how would they do this?
I believe it's a civil matter between the two parties, in that they, as to who has rights of access, what their rights of access can consist of, and against the right of the developer to do the works to Mushroom Castle, but it's a civil matter and not a planning one.
Mm-hmm.
I understand it.
James, would you like to clarify that at all, or are you in agreement with Sarah?
Through you, Chair, yes, I would agree with that. The only thing I would add is that as obviously as the highway authority, the alterations that are required at the actual junction with Chavey Down Road, that's required, as I think Sarah referred to, a section 278 agreement. The council has control over how those works are implemented and the relevant signage, etc., that we put in place while those works are taken place. And obviously we would ask the developer to coordinate with residents when those works are obviously undertaken. But in terms of the lane itself and those works to that private and adopted lane, I do agree that that's a civil matter, and obviously the developer or whoever carries out the works needs to ensure that they pay regard to the rights that others may have. But as I say, that's a separate civil and legal matter that they should, need to discuss with the others that are affected, namely the other residents.
Could I just have a supplementary, Chairman? Would you mind?
Yeah.
Could I just ask, James, one thing I'm confused at as a councillor, and I've discussed this with Andy, is that it depends on the red line on the application. So if the red line included all of Mushroom Castle, i.e. the lane, we would have more control over what was happening. Whereas if it hasn't been included, as you say, it's a civil matter and there's nothing we can do about it. Is that correct?
I'll try and answer it. I might have to bring Sarah in because she's your planning expert with red lines. But my understanding is that that sort of conversation relates more to how you can provide or put in place conditions or controls on applications. Clearly, the red line needs to cover all the land impacted by an application, whether it's the site itself for housing, the access road of which you would need access rights across, but also any improvements too. So in that regard, obviously I can't speak directly for what my colleague said to you, but in making sure the red line covers the areas necessary to undertake the works that are required or approved is what is the key thing in this respect.
Just to jump in before you hand that to Sarah, isn't this the case though, that the works that you describe on the junction would indeed cover the whole of Mushroom Castle Lane, because they're talking about widening bits and then all the junction, which depended on the application.
The junction is slightly different because that forms part of the existing adopted highway or public highway. When you get into the lane itself, that is the bit that is effectively a private or an adopted road. So it's not that the red line issue is different, but the controls and the ability to do work on that section of the road, the very limited first part of it, which is the public highway, is controlled in a different way, because as public highway, you have different rights to be able to do works. Once you're into the site, which isn't public, you have obviously a different civil process, or the correct processes with the people who are responsible for the road to undertake. Sorry if that's not clear, but
confusing. And it's not you, James. I think the legislation is confusing.
Well, unfortunately, the legislation only covers the public highway that I'm referring to in terms of those carrying out those works.
Okay, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I'm concerned about the ownership of the land that's going to be taken into the highway. And I guess that's another civil matter, isn't it? But the developer surely has sought agreement from the residents to make that change. No, I'm boxing myself into a question.
No, I think I know what your question is. The question is with the widening of the private road for 50 yards into the application site. You're asking about whether that impacts on ownership. Does that go across different ownerships? Is that right?
Yeah.
I thought that's what you're getting at.
Thank you.
Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This was looked at, if my memory is correct, at the time of the full application, which was discussed at committee. And I remember at that point going out with a tape measure and measuring the width of Mushroom Castle to make sure that it was all in the red line of the site. And what James said previously is correct, that the red line defines the site of the planning permission, so the extent of the planning permission. And then I refer you back to what I said previously, that the council has control of enforcement powers within that if the development is not carried out in accordance with the planning permission, we can take action within that red line. The extent of the highway boundary is slightly different. Would it help if I shared the plan again, Chair? Because that
Please, yeah.
is where the so the bit in pink is the adopted highway, and the green line is the extent of the highway boundary. So anything in white is part of the private lane of Mushroom Castle. And at the time of the application, the full application, or the parent permission, the ownership was looked into and it was considered at that point. And as I said, it was granted at that point to undertake the works and the development. This is merely to agree the conditions and to agree the detail of that work in accordance with the condition that was imposed on that full application at that time. So I hope that answers your question, Councillor Brown.
It doesn't really, if I may. I'm concerned about the ownership of of Mushroom Castle opposite the houses that have to look after the road out there.
Councillor Brown, if I could just stop you, I'm sorry. All of that was considered at the previous application when the principle of development and the widening of the road was decided. So that ownership of that and the widening of the lane is not part of, it was part of the substantive application. What we're now looking at is principle of access, means of access, which the officer showed you that suite plan for vehicles and the building plan.
So anyway, it's a civil matter, I should imagine.
It is, yeah.
Ultimately, yes.
Okay, if you could unshare again, please. So, thank you. Councillor Ballyboat.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening. Thank you, Sarah. My question is on the public park, page 67, 6.1, the objections. The second one says developer has started work ahead of planning permission. And the officer's comment was, or is, that the developer began the work prior to discharging conditions attached. What conditions were these?
They're the ones that we're dealing with this evening, Mike. The conditions 3, 4, 5, 8, and 15.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Any other questions, members? You can put your hand up if you want to. Okay, nobody else has got any questions. It then falls to me to move the officer's recommendation, which is on page
71, Chairman, and the supplementary, which is on page 1 on the supplementary. So page 71, the recommendation.
Page 71 of your agenda, and there is also an informative
supplementary on page 1
as well on page 1. Do I have a seconder, please?
I'm happy to second it, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Members, as you've heard before, the actual principle of development, the size, shape and structure of the property has already been approved on a planning permission last year. This is a conditions application which seeks to formalise and allow the 5 conditions on, which is condition 3, materials, condition 4, windows, condition 5, means of access, condition 8, site organisation, which we've seen, and that's also part of the supplementary advisory, and condition 15, renewable energy. So if I could ask you to keep your debate to that, which is what we're deciding this evening. Does the seconder wish to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Only very briefly to say that, as you've summed up, Chairman, I mean, say this, there was a previous planning, an earlier planning application, which was approved by us. I appreciate that there are now 10 postal addresses that have been received for against this current application. But as you've said, we are specifically looking at the 5 conditions that have been set out, conditions that are shown at the top of page 67. The case officer has set out what actions have been taken against those conditions. And on that basis, Chairman, I will be supporting the recommendation for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Would any other member wish to speak? Councillor Virgo.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I do feel for the residents, and I think all the members do. And the reason I'd raise this is because myself and Councillor Gore, as you explained very well, Mr. Chairman, that the conditions that you referred to, that Councillor Badabel asked about, were not given to this council, were not, the developers did not give a plan of relinquishing those conditions. And so they started without permission. And actually, we were called down because of the chaos, and I do mean chaos, because I sent photographs into enforcement of what happened. And what happened is the residents were not informed of the work. So they turned up, they blocked the track, the single track road. And when I was there, for instance, a nurse couldn't get to hospital. And there were various people that were pretty disgruntled by the whole thing. And I have to say the developers gave me short shrift, and they gave Councillor Gore short shrift. And so we constantly trying to get enforcement to come down and give a bit of muscle to all this. Now, in the end, we stopped the work. But the trouble is the feeling that has happened between the developers and the residents is really quite evil, as you can imagine. So I've worked quite strongly with Sarah and Andy to try and see if we can put a condition on the hours of work and an informative of telling the residents so that they can make arrangements, because the public transport in this area is pretty awful, to be honest with you. Now, I understand we can't do this by the laws of planning, and the only thing we can do is to put on an informative, which we've done. And I hope, if the developers are listening, that they now properly coordinate with the residents, so the residents can make arrangements to leave their cars outside the lane if they want to get out, etc. So I would say that I understand completely the residents' annoyance. And we've done our best, I think, to try and alleviate that. But as you said yourself, and the officers said, Mr. Chairman, it's unfortunately a civil matter. And if someone blocks you, you have the right to go to the police and remove that vehicle, so you have the right of access. So thanks for allowing me to speak, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Virgo. Does any other member wish to speak? Councillor Badibag.
Thank you, Chair. I think for me, with the unadopted road or a private road, when we gave the permission, I think, I'm speculating here, that the developers, or let me just say the residents, might have thought the council gave the permission to do all the road works without any legal ramifications, i.e. asking the residents. I believe when we move forward with this type of plans or applications, we have to make it clear to the residents concerned that the planning condition only applies to the planning. If you want to do something, you got to do this, not a permission by the council, giving you the authority to carry out the work, regardless of who the land belongs to, if you see what I mean. I don't think I'm phrasing this properly, but I know what I'm trying to say in my head, but that is, I'm just trying to make sure that we phrase conditions in such a way that if there's any legal ramifications or any legal agreements that need to be sorted, that residents are not thinking that, oh, this is just a blank, what's it called, permission from the council for people to just carry on and do things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Badway. Any other member wish to speak? Do you want to take your hand down, Mike? Thank you. Any other member wish to speak? Okay, it leaves to me to sum up in that case. Members, most of the discussion this evening, quite rightly, has been about access and about the issues which apply to an unadopted road, which is not the council's highway. We have no jurisdiction over it. It is really, really difficult for residents to understand the limits of planning policies and law and what is a civil matter. The speaker referred to ownership of the lane. This, unfortunately, is a civil matter and not a planning matter. And unfortunately, this committee has no jurisdiction over, you know, what goes on a private unadopted road. It's very unfortunate, and you know, it may seem grossly unfair to residents that we can't protect them in this instance. But it's exactly the same law that applies to, you know, what you do and what you say in your back garden. We have no control over that. So we have to look at this application strictly on the 5 conditions that are being asked to approve this evening, which have you heard, which is materials, which you heard the materials that are being used, the windows to be obscurely glazed and non-opening, which you heard, means of access, which has been most of the discussion this evening, site organisation, which there is now a site organisation plan, a suite plan, which shows the access for large vehicles, and also there is an informative now as part of the yellow sheet on the supplementary report, which gives hours of working. Renewables and energy is another one which has been dealt with and been agreed by the officers. So therefore, I'll ask you to vote accordingly. Hannah, can you go through the vote, please, members? If you can turn on your microphone when your name is called.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Angel.
Regretfully, 4.
Councillor Dr. Barnard.
Ditto, regretfully, 4.
Councillor Birch.
4.
Councillor Brossard.
4.
Councillor Brown.
Unfortunately, 4.
Councillor Dudley.
4.
Councillor Badibay.
4.
Councillor Green.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Hayes.
4.
Councillor Hayden.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Mattick.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Mackenzie.
4.
Councillor Mossam.
Reluctantly, 4.
Councillor Parker.
4.
And Councillor Virgo.
Against.
That's 14 for and 1 against, Chair.
Okay, the recommendation is that the delegating officer approve this application. Thank you. We move on to agenda item 8, which is land south of Foxley Lane and west of Murray Lane, Binfield, which is on page 73 of your agenda papers. Okay, back over to you then, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, you should be able to see the presentation now. Hopefully.
Yep, can see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So this application seeks planning permission for the erection of a single 4-bed dwelling on land to the south of Foxley Lane and west of Murray Hill Lane in Binfield. The site is a greenfield site measuring approximately 0.3 hectares and is bounded to the east by residential properties on Murray Hill, to the west by the barn, which is this property here, and to the south by the boundary of Mosscroft here. And to the north, the site faces onto Foxley Lane and the residential dwellings within Binfield here. So if I'd like to draw your attention to the supplementary, correction on page 83, paragraph 9.36, garage should refer to a carport, and 2 changes to the recommendations to reflect changes to the conditions. I think it's condition 2 and 17. There's also a verbal supplementary to add an informative to the applicant that they will need to enter into a section 278 agreement to undertake works within the highway to do with the access. Okay. So the application seeks consent for a 2-storey barn-style dwelling located to the south of the site with access from Murrah Hill Lane. The access is an existing access which currently serves Mosscroft and provides access into the site with a 5-bar gate. The footprint of the building would be 15.5 metres by 7.9 with a height to the ridge of 7.1. As said, it's like a barn style building with a brick skirt and then horizontal wood to it and a tiled roof, full height windows, as you'd expect from barn. It's pretty basic in form and shape and design. Here we have the plan showing the internal accommodation. So downstairs we have, going upstairs first, sorry, 4 bedrooms, 2 with ensuite and a bathroom and landing. And then downstairs we have open plan living and a lounge separated. It's the carport with a covered cycle store, covered and secure cycle store. And here are photos of the sites. This is looking towards White House Farm Cottage. You can see the site's basically just empty. This is Mosscroft. This is where the entrance would be. So you've got Mosscroft on the left-hand side and White House Farm Cottage with the outbuildings and the wall going around it to the right. This is the barn, which is on the western side of the site. That's the entrance. So you can see that the entrance, the bell mouth, that's the entrance into Mosscroft, and this would be the entrance into the application site. And there is a bit further back, you can see people already park across that entrance. So on to the planning considerations principle. So policies CS2, CS9, EN8 and H5 have an in principle objection to development in the countryside and are not in conformity with paragraph 170 of the MPPF. Reduced rate is therefore attributed to these policies and the application should be determined by applying the planning balance as laid out on page 79 of the officer's report. In this case, the proposal would provide an additional dwelling on a greenfield site bordered by residential properties and the settlement boundary. It's concluded that the principle of infilling with one dwelling in this location is acceptable, subject to other material planning considerations being accepted. So as already alluded to, the site is located within an area of ad hoc residential development, which has a looser grain and lower density to that within the settlement boundary located north of Foxley Lane. It's considered that the proposal replicates the low density of the surrounding residential properties and is of appropriate mass and scale and therefore would not have a detrimental impact upon the character and appearance of the area. White House Farm Cottage is grade 2 listed and the site is located to the west of this. Therefore, there's a statutory duty upon decision makers to pay special regard to the desirability of preserving the building or its setting, and this should be given great weight in the decision-making process. A full description of the listed White House Farm Cottage can be found on page 82 of the report. The proposal would be cited within the grounds historically connected with this listed property, and this part of the site makes a strong contribution to the setting. The proposed development is for one dwelling which would preserve the open and spacious character and would result in a natural and less cramped form of development. Originally, the application came in for two kind of cul-de-sac-y residential properties, so that it didn't fit in with the character and appearance of the site and looked a bit cramped. So in summing up, the council's heritage consultant considers that the proposal would have less than substantial harm, and the harm would be a low order within that category, and therefore he has no objections to the application. So in terms of considering amenities on neighbouring properties, the council's SPD on design states that there should be a distance of 22 metres window to window across back gardens to preserve privacy. I mean, windows have been carefully placed to remove the potential for overlooking. And where there is less than 22 metres between windows, for example, between the barn and the proposal, there's a very acute angle, and as this plan shows. So if I zoom in, there's first floor windows, double height serving the 2 bedrooms, if you recall from the elevations, located more centrally than that. But the angle is about 20 degrees, so it's very, very acute. And therefore, it's so acute as to render the relationship acceptable. There are acceptable distances between the proposal and Mosscroft to the south. Accordingly, there's no objection raised on amenity grounds. Objections have been raised on surface water flooding issues in the area. Whilst there's no formal consultation with the lead local flood authority for an application of this size, officers have had conversations with the senior drainage engineer. It was felt that given the large amount of space around the proposed property, the use of gravel for the driveway, there would not be an increase in flooding as a result of this proposal. So the standard SUDS condition has been attached to the application, and in addition, an informative is included informing the applicant of the poor infiltration in the area and the need to possibly do some more work. Accordingly, there are no flooding reasons to refuse the application. Likewise, highways, biodiversity have not raised any objections to the planning application. So now we must consider the balance. Whilst this application seeks a new dwelling within the countryside, reduced weight is given to the policies within the local plan that have an in-principle objection. The proposal is considered to replicate the pattern of development, be of appropriate size, mass and scale, and preserve the open character of the site. The proposal is therefore considered not to detrimentally harm the character or appearance of the area. The proposal would affect the setting of White House Farm Cottage, a Grade 2 listed building. It was concluded that this would result in less than substantial harm to the significance of the listed building, and within that category of less than substantial harm, the harm would be of a low order. In accordance with paragraph 193 of the NPPF, any harm must be afforded great weight to the heritage assets conservation. And paragraph 196 goes on to say that where a development proposed would lead to a less than substantial harm, as in this case, the harm should be weighed against the public benefits. In this case, the benefits would be an additional dwelling and contribution to the council's housing land supply, and the associated social and economic benefits that brings. It's the government's objective to significantly boost housing supply, and as such, the contribution towards the housing land supply carries significant weight in favour of the proposal. Additional housing also brings associated social and economic benefits, including creation of jobs and input into the local economy, and together they are considered to outweigh the less than substantial harm to the significance of the designated heritage asset. In light of this assessment, the application is considered to be acceptable in terms of highway safety, character and appearance of the area, and amenities of neighbouring properties. So therefore, subject to the completion of a section 106 to secure the SPA mitigation, relevant conditions to the application, it is therefore before you recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. Sorry, I had problems finding the unmute button myself. Members, do you have any questions, please? Councillor Ballyboe.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you again, Sarah. Would you say that the principle of development that you just read out now could apply to pretty much anything built on anywhere in England?
It depends on the policies of the local authority where the actual site is. I mean, in our case, our policies in the local plan predate the NPPF. Therefore, we have to look at the conformity with them and compare them with the NPPF. And whilst the NPPF protects the countryside for its intrinsic character, it doesn't protect it full stop and give a blanket protection like our policies did at the time. And I have quoted within my report, there is a quote from an appeal decision where the inspector came to that same conclusion. So we have to have regard to that in our future decision-making process and weigh up the character issues and weigh it up in the balance of what harm it would do versus the benefits. In this case, there'd be very little harm because of where it sits within a string of other developments of a similar nature and character.
Our policy on, I'm trying to, if you just remind me, that my recollection is that there has to be a special circumstance for us to build on the countryside or green.
No, that's Greenbelt.
Greenbelt. So this is not Greenbelt.
No, this is not Greenbelt. This is countryside.
Sorry, can you just remind me again? Sorry, Chair. What's the difference between countryside and the Greenbelt?
Perhaps Sarah could answer that clearer than me.
Yes, please.
The Greenbelt is a statutory designation where tighter policy restrictions apply to prevent urban sprawl. So they're generally around large urban conurbations, such as London, such as Birmingham and Coventry, to name a couple. The countryside is just undesignated. So the Greenbelt is a tighter designation, if you like, to protect against development.
We used to call it land outside of development, didn't we?
Yeah, land outside
Outside settlements.
outside settlement. Thank you, Councillor Birch. Yeah.
Thank you. Just lastly, we do have Greenbelt in Bracknell, right?
Yes.
No?
Yeah.
Yes.
And we stood to protect it. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Brossard.
Thank you very much. Sarah, did I hear you say that the windows at first floor level serve bedrooms?
Yes, they do.
What about the bathrooms? Are there bathrooms? I couldn't see on the plan whether there are windows for the bathrooms and whether they, if there are windows, whether they are obscure glazed.
Just bear with me. I believe all the windows have been changed to roof lights. Sorry, all the bathroom windows have been changed to roof lights so that they'll be above eye height and you're not going to be able to see out of them anyway because it will just be above your head.
That may, Sarah, have come about through the reduction in the height of the roof by 90 centimetres then possibly, because I did read in the report that the roof height had been lowered. So whether it is probably academic anyway, but I wonder whether that, you know, that brought about the change in the roof lights being incorporated because the roof height had actually been changed.
There's been a lot of negotiation between myself and the applicant, which has resulted in this final design. And barn conversions typically don't have many window openings because they're not typical of a barn structure. You have the big full height ones so you can get vehicles in and that forms characteristic. So through the design process, a lot of the smaller windows were removed and replaced with roof lights. And if you want to see the plan, the bathrooms and en suites where they are lit out externally are lit with roof lights rather than windows in the elevations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brossard. Any other members have any questions? No, in which case it falls to me again to move the officer's recommendation, which is on page, Mike?
On page 88, with the supplementary, Chairman, page 88, with the supplementary on pages 1 and 2.
Thank you. If I have a seconder for that, please.
I'm happy to second it, Chairman.
Thank you. Members, this application, as you can see, has been the result of numerous discussions between the applicant and officers, and you will see from the report that through those discussions, the height of the property has been reduced, and as you heard from the previous question, any windows that were in the upper part of the building serving the en-suites and the bathrooms are now roof lights rather than side-facing windows. In fact, the only side-facing windows are the ones you saw on the plan, which are the whole of the height of the property. When it comes to applications for development in the countryside, there is a balancing act which has been exercised in this, which is also supported by recent appeals and policies ENA H5 CS policy CS9 express that the countryside is to be protected for its own sake. In that regard, is inconsistent now with the new planning policy framework, and as such, the weight to be attached to those policies that we had has in fact been reduced, and in the absence of any harm, the benefits of the proposal is deemed to outweigh the limited conflict with the development plan, and that is the view that planning inspectors now take on applications within area outside of development. So therefore, I would ask you to bear that in mind when you enter into debate. Would anybody like to speak? Sorry, would a seconder like to speak?
Yes, very briefly, Chairman, just to endorse what you said about the amount of work that has been put in by the case officer, who I believe is fully engaged with the applicant in coming forward with the design that I believe, and I hope we all agree, complements the adjacent Grade 2 listed building. This is evident in the impression on page 81 showing a timber-clad barn-type construction, which, as you said, Chairman, where the height has been reduced. On that basis, Chairman, I'm very much supportive of the case officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Any other member wish to speak? In that case, I'll put it to the vote, please, Hannah.
Thank you. Councillor Angel.
For.
Councillor Dr. Barnard.
For.
Councillor Birch.
Against.
Councillor Brossard.
For.
Councillor Brown.
For.
Councillor Dudley.
For.
Councillor Badibe.
For.
Councillor Green.
For.
Councillor Mrs Hayes.
For.
Councillor Hayden.
For.
Councillor Mrs Mattick.
For.
Councillor Mrs Mackenzie.
For.
Councillor Mossam.
For.
Councillor Parker.
For.
And Councillor Virgo.
For.
It's 14 for and 1 against, Chair.
The recommendation is that the officer, delegating officer, approve this application. Thank you, and thank you very much, members. That's the end of the meeting. And if you could advise me, please, Jen, when we